My pregnant wife smiled when she signed the papers, because she thought my child had just made her rich. 10 minutes later, the judge opened my will, and that smile disappeared like someone had turned off the lights in the room. I remember the sound of the pen more than anything. Not her voice. Not the bailiff shifting near the wall. Not even the low hum of the courthouse air conditioner pushing cold air over polished wood and old carpet. Just the pen. Madison Whitaker dragged it across the final page with one hand resting on the curve of her stomach, slow and confident, like she was signing a hotel receipt after a weekend she knew someone else would pay for. She was 8 months pregnant, dressed in a cream-colored maternity dress, hair curled neatly over one shoulder, wedding ring still shining under the fluorescent lights like it had any meaning left. Across the aisle, I sat with both hands flat on the table. I did not move. I did not blink much. I had learned months earlier that people show you who they are when they think silence means weakness. Madison glanced at me once while the ink dried, and there was pity in her eyes. That was the part that almost made me laugh. Not because anything was funny, but because she truly believed I was the one who did not understand what had just happened. Her attorney, Evan Brooks, sat behind her in a navy suit that looked too expensive for a man who called himself just a family friend. He leaned forward and whispered something near her ear. She nodded. Then she looked at the judge as if the courtroom already belonged to her. Judge Margaret Harlan adjusted her glasses and reviewed the signed agreement. The pages covered the house in Westchester County, a portion of Whitaker Development, a monthly support request large enough to make the clerk pause, and a proposed trust for the unborn child. Madison had pushed hard for that last part. She wanted control of the child's money until adulthood. She said it was about stability. She said it was about motherhood. She said a lot of things in that soft, careful voice people use when they know an audience is listening. Then she placed her palm over her stomach and said, "Nathan should have thought about his legacy before trying to walk away from his family." The room stayed quiet. My lawyer, Robert Caldwell, did not look at me. He did not need to. We had been waiting for that sentence. We had been waiting for her to say the word legacy in front of a judge, with her signature still wet on paper that tied every claim she made to the baby she said was mine. Judge Harlan looked over the rim of her glasses. "Mr. Whitaker, do you understand the terms your wife has signed?" I looked at Madison. She gave me a small smile, the kind you give a man you believe has already lost. I turned back to the bench and said, "Yes, Your Honor. And now that Mrs. Whitaker has signed, I'd like my will entered into the record." Madison's smile held for 1 second too long. Then Evan stopped whispering. The first time I noticed Madison counting my life, she was standing barefoot in our kitchen at 2:13 in the morning, lit only by the blue glow of her laptop. I had come downstairs for water after a 12-hour day walking a job site in White Plains, my boots still dusty by the back door, my shoulders carrying the kind of tired that settles into bone. She did not hear me at first. She was too focused on the screen, one hand moving across the trackpad, the other resting near a yellow legal pad filled with neat columns of numbers. At the top of the page, she had written house, company, trust, insurance, child. I remember that word because it did not belong there yet. Back then, she had not told me she was pregnant. Back then, she still smiled at breakfast and asked how my meetings went, but the warmth had started leaving her voice in small, careful withdrawals. I stood in the hallway shadow and watched her search terms I never expected to see in my own home. Spousal elective share, unborn child inheritance rights, New York marital property business ownership. She was not looking for recipes, vacations, or nursery colors. She was looking for leverage. I cleared my throat softly so I would not startle her. Madison shut the laptop halfway before turning around. Not all the way, just enough to hide the screen. That told me more than the search history ever could. Could not sleep. I asked. She smiled, but it arrived late. Just thinking about the future. Those words should have sounded loving. They did not. They sounded like an accountant closing a file. When I married Madison, she did not talk like that. She used to love the unfinished parts of life. The first condo we bought had a heater that clicked all night and a kitchen so narrow we had to turn sideways to pass each other. She called it cozy. I called it temporary. We ate takeout on moving boxes and promised each other that one day we would have a house with a real porch and enough room to breathe. I built that life slowly. One contract at a time. One county permit at a time. One payroll Friday at a time. when I would sit in my truck outside the office and make sure every crew member got paid before I paid myself. Madison used to say that was why she loved me. Because I was steady. Because I did not chase noise. Because I made the ground feel level. Then the ground became expensive, and steady stopped being romantic. She wanted gala tables, charity photos, weekends in Aspen, a black Range Rover that still smelled new. I gave her most of it. That was my mistake. Not because giving is wrong, but because I mistook appetite for happiness. The more she had, the less she saw me. I became the man who funded the room, not the man standing in it. By the time she started asking what would happen if something happened to me, I already knew she was not worried about losing a husband. She was calculating what she would keep. Madison told me she was pregnant on a Sunday evening, while rain tapped gently against the dining room windows and my parents' old clock ticked above the sideboard. She had set the table like we were hosting company, linen napkins, white candles, the good plates we almost never used. That should have been my first warning. Madison did not prepare moments unless she wanted them remembered a certain way. I came in from the garage after checking a leak near the back steps, hands washed, but still smelling faintly of cedar and pipe sealant. She was standing beside the table in a pale blue dress, smiling with both hands folded. In front of her, for one quiet second, I wanted to believe the smile was real. I wanted to believe the woman I married had come back to me through some door I had stopped watching. Then she said, "I have news." Her voice was bright, practiced, almost too clean. I looked at the candles. I looked at the untouched glasses of sparkling cider. Then I looked at her face, and something in my chest tightened before she even said the words. "I am pregnant, Nathan." The room did not spin. People say that when their life changes. Mine did not. The room stayed perfectly still, and that was worse. The clock kept ticking. The rain kept moving down the glass. Madison kept watching me, waiting for the right reaction, the one a husband is supposed to give when he hears he is going to be a father. I stood there with my hand on the back of the chair and tried to make the dates behave. They would not. For most of the spring, I had been sleeping more often at job sites than at home, buried under a hospital expansion project that was 6 weeks behind because of supply delays and county inspections. When I was home, Madison and I lived like polite strangers sharing expensive furniture. Separate schedules. Separate rooms some nights. Conversations that sounded like weather reports. There had been no warmth, no closeness, no marriage in the way that makes an announcement like that simple. Still, I stepped toward her. I did what decent men do before the facts are ready. I held my face steady. "That is big news," I said. She crossed the room and wrapped her arms around me. Her perfume was familiar, but the gesture felt staged, like she was hugging an idea instead of a man. Over her shoulder, I saw her phone light up on the counter. One message preview. No name, just initials saved as EB. 3 words appeared before the screen went dark. Did he believe? I felt her cheek against my shirt. I felt the rain behind me. I felt the old version of myself reach for denial because denial is warm and truth is not. She pulled back with wet eyes that arrived too quickly. "Whatever problems we had," she whispered, placing my hand over her stomach, "this baby changes the math. Not our life. Not our family. The math." That was the moment the candles stopped looking romantic and started looking like evidence. Evan Brooks entered our marriage the way rot enters a beam, quietly enough that you blame the smell on something else. Madison introduced him as a legal consultant from a boutique firm in Stanford, a man who helped people organize complicated assets and avoid expensive mistakes. He was polished in the harmless way men like that learn to be polished: navy suits, clean fingernails, careful smile, voice always half a step softer than the room. The first time he shook my hand, he held it just long enough to measure me. Not challenge me. Measure me. There is a difference. He looked around our foyer at the walnut floors, the framed permits from my first major builds, the black and white photograph of my father standing beside a half-finished porch in Montana, and I could almost hear numbers moving behind his eyes. Madison said he was helping her understand family planning. That phrase stayed with me because it sounded responsible while hiding every sharp edge underneath. After the pregnancy announcement, Evan became a shadow with a calendar invite. He was at the coffee shop when Madison said she needed advice. He was on speakerphone when she asked about insurance beneficiaries. His name appeared on forwarded articles about protecting mothers, preserving lifestyle, securing a child's future. Every phrase was polished. Every phrase had a hook in it. I wanted to confront her. The old me nearly did. The husband in me wanted to ask why another man suddenly knew more about our future than I did. But the builder in me understood something colder. When a wall starts cracking, you do not yell at the crack. You find the load-bearing failure. So I watched. I listened. I let people keep talking. One Thursday afternoon in late October, I left a site inspection early because a county engineer canceled at the last minute. The sky was low and gray, the kind of New York afternoon that makes every parking lot look tired. Madison had told me she had a routine appointment at the women's clinic near Rye. I pulled into the lot because part of me still wanted to be the husband who showed up. I saw her before I parked. She was standing near the entrance beneath the covered drop-off, one hand on her stomach, the other holding a folder. Evan stood close beside her. Too close for a consultant. Not touching in a way anyone could call obvious. Nothing dramatic. Nothing a photograph alone would prove. But then he reached out and rested his hand against her stomach for one brief second. Familiar and careful, like a man acknowledging something he believed was his place to acknowledge. Madison did not pull away. She smiled up at him, small and private, the kind of smile she had not given me in months. I sat in my truck with the engine running and my hands on the wheel. I did not step out. I did not honk. I did not make a scene in front of nurses and strangers carrying diaper bags. I just watched Evan open her car door, watched Madison slide inside, watched him lean down and say something that made her laugh. The sound did not reach me through the glass. It did not need to. Some moments come with subtitles written directly on your chest. When they drove away in separate cars, I stayed there until the dashboard clock changed twice. Then I took out my phone, opened my notes app, and typed the date, time, location, and what I saw. No adjectives. No anger. Just facts. That night, Madison asked why I was quiet. I told her I was tired. It was the first honest thing I had said all day, just not in the way she thought. I went back to my father's house the next morning because some decisions need old walls around them. It sat 2 hours north of the city on 12 acres of tired grass and maple trees, a white farmhouse with peeling shutters, a gravel drive, and a workshop that still smelled like pine boards, motor oil, and the winter coats he used to hang by the door. William Whitaker had been gone 6 years, but that place still held his shape. His coffee mug was still on the shelf above the workbench. His carpenter pencils were still lined inside a soup can. The old radio still had a strip of masking tape over the dial where he marked the station that played baseball games on summer nights. I stood there in my wool coat, 42 years old, worth more on paper than my father ever imagined, and felt like a boy who had come home because the world had finally gotten too loud. My father believed in simple things. Pay your debts. Keep your word. Fix what you can. Protect what other people bled to build. He was not a rich man when I was young, but he understood ownership in a way Madison never did. To him, land was not a prize. It was memory with boundaries. I found the cedar box exactly where he told me it would be, on the top shelf of the workshop closet behind a stack of old drop cloths. The brass latch had gone dull. Dust clung to the lid. Inside were the documents I had avoided reading closely for years because grief makes paperwork feel disrespectful. There were trust records, property deeds, letters from attorneys, and a sealed envelope with my name written in my father's blocky handwriting. Nathan, open when you need spine more than comfort. I sat on a wooden stool and held that envelope for a long minute before tearing it open. The letter was only 1 page. No poetry, no big speech, just my father in ink. Son, love generously, but never confuse love with permission. A good woman will stand beside what you build. The wrong one will ask where the keys are before the roof is finished. Protect the bloodline trust. Protect the company. Protect your name. I read that line 3 times. Protect your name. Not your money. Not your pride. Your name. By noon, I was in Robert Caldwell's office with the cedar box on the chair beside me. Robert had handled my father's estate, my first commercial purchase, and every contract that mattered after that. He was the kind of lawyer who did not decorate sentences. He listened while I told him about Madison's searches, the legal pad, the pregnancy announcement, Evan Brooks, and the clinic parking lot. He did not interrupt. He only took off his glasses, cleaned them with a cloth, and said, "Nathan, do not chase emotion. Build a record." Then we opened my father's trust documents. The room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for me to feel the floor return under my feet. The core properties were not. Marital assets. The holding company had restrictions Madison had never understood. The old land, the first developments, the family voting shares, all of it sat behind structures my father built before Madison ever learned my last name. Robert tapped the papers once and said, "She thinks she is negotiating with you. She is not. She is negotiating with a dead man who knew better." That should have felt satisfying. It did not. It felt heavy. Then Robert asked the question I had been avoiding. "And the child?" I looked at the rain streaking down his office window and heard Madison's voice again. "This baby changes the math." My answer came out quiet. "If the baby is mine, I will protect it." Robert nodded. "And if not?" I closed the cedar box. "Then I will not let another man's lie inherit my father's life." Madison started pushing for settlement 2 weeks after I left Robert Caldwell's office, and that told me she was not patient anymore. Patience belongs to people who trust the ground under them. She did not. Her messages changed from wounded to practical, then from practical to urgent. "We should be adults, Nathan. We should settle before the baby comes. It would look terrible if this dragged out." Each sentence arrived polished, calm, and sharpened at the end. She did not ask how I was sleeping. She did not ask whether I had eaten. She asked whether I understood how judges viewed husbands who abandoned pregnant wives. That word appeared again and again. Abandoned. Evan had taught her that word. I could almost see him writing it on a legal pad, underlining it twice, telling her emotion was useful only when it could be filed. I did not argue with her. I sent every message to Robert. I saved every voicemail. I photographed every envelope. Documentation became my morning coffee. It was bitter, but it kept me awake. Madison wanted a private mediation in White Plains before the court date. Robert told me to agree. "Let her bring the baby into the money," he said. "Let her make the claim herself." So I walked into that conference room on a gray Tuesday morning wearing the same charcoal suit I had worn to my father's funeral. Not for drama. For memory. Madison sat across from me with Evan behind her shoulder, not at the table, but close enough to feed her confidence. She looked softer than she sounded in her emails. Pregnancy had changed her face, rounded the edges, made strangers open doors and lower their voices. She knew that. She used silence like a spotlight, one hand on her stomach, eyes lowered whenever the mediator looked her way. Then, when numbers came up, her eyes lifted fast. The house. Temporary support. Long-term support. Medical coverage. A protected account for the child. Management rights over that account. A percentage of distributions from Whitaker Development if anything happened to me before the child turned 18. She called it security. Robert called it what it was, but only later. In the room, he stayed quiet, his pen moving slowly across a yellow pad. Madison mistook that for weakness. People often do when a smart man does not rush to prove he is smart. At one point, she leaned forward and said, "Nathan, you are going to be a father. You cannot keep acting like this is only about you." I looked at her hand resting on her stomach. Then I looked at Evan. He looked away first. That small movement did more for me than any confession could have. We went through 6 hours of proposals. 6 hours of coffee cooling in paper cups. 6 hours of Madison speaking about my duty while Evan checked his watch whenever the mediator mentioned disclosure. By late afternoon, she had the draft she wanted. It tied her financial claims directly to the unborn child. It named the child as the reason for expedited relief. It asked the court to consider future inheritance expectations. It was exactly the rope Robert had been waiting for her to braid. Madison signed first, in blue ink, pressing hard enough to leave marks on the page beneath it. Then she slid the packet toward me like she had just handed down mercy. I did not touch the pen. Robert closed his folder and said, "We will address execution in court." Madison smiled because she thought delay meant fear. Evan smiled because he thought paper only cuts one way. I walked out into the parking lot with cold air in my lungs and my father's letter folded inside my coat pocket. For the first time in months, I did not feel behind. I felt positioned. The courtroom felt colder after Madison signed, as if the building itself understood that paper had weight. Judge Harlan sat beneath the seal of the state of New York, her glasses low on her nose, the signed settlement draft resting beside her right hand. Madison kept her palm on her stomach and her chin lifted, but I could see the small rhythm in her fingers. Tap. Pause. Tap. She wanted the judge to approve the agreement quickly. She wanted the ink turned into order before anyone asked the question she had spent months avoiding. Robert Caldwell stood slowly, the way older men stand when they know the room has finally reached the part that matters. He did not raise his voice. He did not point at Madison. He simply lifted a cream-colored folder from his briefcase and said, "Your Honor, before the court considers any claim based on inheritance expectation, we ask that Mr. Whitaker's executed will and related trust documents be entered into the record." Madison turned her head toward Evan, and for the first time that morning, he did not look ready. His mouth tightened. His eyes moved to the folder, then to the exit, then back to the bench. Judge Harlan accepted the documents from the clerk. The sound of the first page turning was small, almost gentle. That was the strange part. Life does not always announce the moment it changes. Sometimes it sounds like paper sliding over paper. The judge read silently at first. Madison tried to smile through it, a patient little expression meant to say this was all a desperate delay. Then Judge Harlan began reading aloud, and the smile started losing pieces. The Whitaker Bloodline Trust, established by William Arthur Whitaker, restricts transfer of protected family assets to verified lineal descendants and approved trustees. The room went still. Madison blinked. Robert kept his hands folded. I watched the judge, not my wife. I had already seen Madison perform. I wanted to hear the law speak plainly. Judge Harlan continued, each sentence clean enough to leave marks. The farmhouse, the original development parcels, the voting shares in Whitaker Holdings. None of it passed by marriage alone. None of it could be managed by a spouse through an unborn child without conditions being satisfied. Madison leaned toward her attorney and whispered, "He cannot do that." Evan did not answer fast enough. Robert did. Quietly. He already did. The judge looked up once, then returned to the document. No unborn child shall inherit under this will, nor shall any person claim authority on behalf of such child, until legal paternity is established by court-recognized testing. That sentence landed without drama. No thunder. No gasp from the gallery. Just a silence so complete I could hear the heating system click inside the wall. Madison's hand stopped moving on her stomach. Evan shifted in his seat. The color in his face changed by one shade, maybe two, but I noticed because I had spent months learning to notice small things. Judge Harlan, read the next section. If paternity was not legally established, all claims tied to anticipated inheritance would be suspended. If fraud or misrepresentation was found in connection with those claims, control rights would be denied. If the child was not mine, the protected assets remained with the trust and designated family beneficiaries. Madison turned toward me then, not with sadness, not even anger, with disbelief, like I had broken a rule by protecting myself before she could finish using me. I did not look away. My hands stayed flat on the table. Hers had started shaking. Madison found her voice again when Judge Harlan finished the paragraph, but it did not sound like the woman who had signed those papers 15 minutes earlier. It was thinner now, strained around the edges, like a ribbon pulled too tight. "Your Honor, this is humiliating," she said, one hand still resting on her stomach as if the gesture itself could protect her from the words on the page. "I am 8 months pregnant. My husband is trying to shame me in open court." The judge looked at her for a long second, not unkindly, but without being moved. "Mrs. Whitaker, the court is reading a legal document that your own filing made relevant." That stopped her. Not completely, but enough. Evan leaned forward and whispered something, and Madison nodded too quickly. Robert Caldwell opened a second folder. It was thinner than the first. That made it worse. A thick file can look like an argument. A thin one looks like a fact. "Your Honor," Robert said, "given that Mrs. Whitaker's requested relief relies on the unborn child's expected inheritance rights, we also ask the court to review a certified copy of the prenatal intake update from Hudson Women's Medical Group." Evan stood halfway before the judge even answered. "Objection. Medical privacy." Robert did not turn toward him. The document was produced in discovery by Mrs. Whitaker's counsel, redacted as required, and submitted in support of her request for medical cost allocation. Judge Harlan extended her hand. The clerk carried the page to the bench. Madison went still. Not quiet. Still. There is a difference. Quiet is a choice. Still is what happens when the body realizes the room has moved without permission. The judge read silently, then paused at one line. Her expression did not change, but the heir did. Evan reached for his briefcase. Just one small movement. Robert saw it. So did I. Mr. Brooks, Judge Harlan said, remain seated. Evan froze with his fingers on the latch. The judge looked back at the paper and read aloud. Emergency contact listed on the updated intake form, Evan Brooks. Relationship to patient, father of child. No one breathed for a moment. Even the clerk stopped typing. Madison's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Evan said, that was an administrative error. His voice came too fast, too smooth, too ready. Robert finally turned toward him. An error submitted by your office, Mr. Brooks. The sentence was calm, but it closed around the room like a door. Madison shook her head, eyes wet now, but not with sorrow. With panic. Nathan, I can explain. That was the first time she had used my name that day without performing for the bench. I looked at her stomach, then at the paper in the judge's hand, then back at her face. I did not feel victory. Victory is warm. This was cold and clean, like stepping outside before sunrise. You did not just betray me, I said quietly. You tried to make my father's name raise. Another man's child. Madison flinched as if the sentence had taken away the last friendly shadow in the room. Judge Harlan placed the medical form beside the will. The court will not approve any inheritance-based relief today. Paternity testing will be ordered after birth, and all claims tied to the unborn child's alleged status as Mr. Whitaker's lineal descendant are suspended pending results. The gavel sounded once. Not loud. It did not need to be. Madison had signed because she thought the baby made her untouchable. The court had just taught her that truth touches everything. The test results arrived on a Friday morning in early March, inside a white envelope that looked too ordinary for something that could end a lie. Robert Caldwell called me before I opened it. His voice was steady, the way it had been through every ugly mile of the case. Nathan, he said, the court received the same copy. I stood in my office at Whitaker Development, looking out over a job site where men in hard hats were setting steel under a pale winter sky. Life was still being built somewhere. That helped. I opened the envelope with a letter opener my father had given me when I signed my first commercial lease. The words were clinical, clean, and final. Probability of paternity, 0%. I read the line once. Then again. I expected anger to rise. It did not. What came instead was a quiet, so deep it felt like standing in an empty church after everyone else had gone home. Madison had given birth 2 weeks earlier to a baby boy. The child was innocent. That mattered. He had not signed forms. He had not whispered strategy. He had not turned my father's name into a tool. So when the final hearing came, I did not ask the court to punish a newborn for the choices of adults. Robert submitted the results. Judge Harlan reviewed them, then removed every claim Madison had tied to Whitaker inheritance, trust control, and family assets. The settlement she had signed became a record of her own misrepresentation. Evan Brooks sat 2 rows behind her, no longer polished, no longer useful. His firm had already suspended him pending review, and the court referred the matter for professional investigation. Madison did not look at him. People like Madison rarely look at the person who helped them build the trap once it closes. She looked at me instead, with tired eyes and a face emptied of performance. Nathan, she said outside the courtroom, her voice small under the marble ceiling. I made mistakes. I nodded, not because that was enough, but because it was finally accurate. Mistakes are missed exits, forgotten birthdays, words spoken too sharply after a hard day. What she had done was not a mistake. It was a plan that failed. Still, I did not say that. Some truths do not need help standing. I authorized 1 payment through the court for the child's immediate medical care, not because Madison deserved kindness, but because the boy deserved a clean beginning no matter whose name was on his birth certificate. Madison cried when Robert told her. I let him deliver the message. I had no more private rooms left in me for her tears. A month later, I drove north to my father's farmhouse. The snow had melted along the fence line, leaving wet earth and flattened grass behind. In the workshop, I placed the cedar box back on the shelf and set my father's letter inside it. Then I stood there for a while, breathing in pine dust and old oil, listening to the quiet of a place no one could talk into becoming theirs. I started a trade school fund that sprang under William Whitaker's name, for kids who wanted to build with their hands and stand on their own work. That felt like inheritance. Not money moving from one account to another, but values surviving the people who tried to price them. Madison thought my death would be her future. Evan thought paperwork could turn a lie into a legacy. But in the end, I did not have to lose my life for the truth to inherit everything. I only had to stop confusing silence with surrender.